The day dawned cloudy, as if the sky mirrored the heaviness in Jack's heart. It had been almost 6 months since he lost his job. The routine of searching for opportunities, sending out resumes, and attending interviews no longer offered hope. The burden of providing for his wife, Sarah, and their daughter, Emily, was starting to weigh on him unbearably. Bills piled up on the kitchen table, a growing stack that symbolized his mounting despair. That day, Jack woke up earlier than usual, determined to try once more. He dressed carefully, as if putting on a dress shirt could restore the dignity he felt he had lost. He grabbed his old blazer, the one he had worn to countless interviews, where he always left with a vague "we'll be in touch." At breakfast, silence hung over the table. Sarah, always thoughtful, watched him with eyes that said she wanted to speak, but knew any words might be too much. On his way to yet another interview, Jack followed his usual route, a path he knew all too well. The city streets had changed in recent months. The once bright and lively storefronts now displayed for rent signs, reflecting the economic crisis that seemed to affect everyone. Life continued, indifferent to his suffering, but inside him, the world was falling apart. As he walked, he got lost in thoughts, replaying every recent failure. What more could he do? Where was he going wrong? Then something unusual pulled him from his thoughts. Across the street, a man was walking quickly, almost stumbling, as if he were trying to escape something unseen. He looked nervous, glancing around until suddenly he tripped and fell hard onto the sidewalk. Jack hesitated for a moment. The world seemed to slow down as he watched the man. No one around moved. A dilemma gripped him. Should he help or continue on and focus on what he had to do? Without thinking much, Jack crossed the street. As he approached, he noticed the man was unconscious. A sense of urgency overtook him, and instinctively, he began to act. He placed the man in a safe position and called for help. A small crowd began to form, but no one knew what to do. Attempts to speak to the man were useless, and Jack's concern grew with every passing second. Minutes later, an ambulance arrived, and the paramedics acted swiftly. They asked if Jack knew the man, to which he firmly replied, no. As they took the man away, Jack's gaze remained fixed on the ambulance as it sped off. He felt an inexplicable emptiness, as if part of himself had been left on that sidewalk. The unknown man remained a lingering concern in his mind. Walking back toward his destination, the scheduled interview no longer seemed so important. What had just happened had shaken him in a way he couldn't quite explain. It was as if that small act of kindness, stopping to help a complete stranger, had reignited something within him. Who was that man? What was his story? Was he, like Jack, struggling in a life that gave no breaks? And more importantly, why did that encounter feel so significant? By the time Jack arrived at the interview, his worry about the outcome had faded. It was just another place where he'd try for a position, like so many others. But something felt different. He sat in the waiting room with a sense of lightness he hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe it was the idea that, despite everything, there was still something within his control, his ability to help, to connect with others, even when everything else seemed pointless. And that afternoon, something inside Jack began to change, though he didn't yet know exactly what. In the days that followed, Jack couldn't shake the thought of the stranger he had helped. As he expected, the interview led nowhere. Another polite, "Thanks for coming," followed by the cold, "We'll be in touch." But it wasn't the lack of job opportunities that bothered him now. Something bigger had been awakened since the encounter with that unknown man. What had happened to him? Was he okay? Was it a sign of something greater for Jack's own life? While these questions haunted him, life at home carried on in its usual rhythm. Sarah continued her work at the accounting firm, and Emily, now 6, had started bringing home school assignments that filled their family evenings. Despite that, the weight of unemployment still hung over Jack's shoulders, and the bills kept piling up on the living room table. One afternoon, while Jack was once again scanning job ads online, the doorbell rang. When he opened the door, he was greeted by a stranger, a man with a serious but kind expression. "Jack?" the man asked, his tone a mixture of formality and curiosity. Jack nodded, feeling a tension rise inside him. What could this stranger possibly want? "I'm the personal assistant to George Adams. You saved his life a few days ago, and he'd very much like to thank you in person," the man said. Jack froze for a moment, unable to grasp the magnitude of what was happening. He had no idea who George Adams was, but from the assistant's tone, it seemed like he was someone important. He asked me to bring you to his home. Would that be possible? He's very grateful and insists on meeting you, the man continued, smiling calmly. Jack hesitated, but something inside him urged him to accept. Perhaps it was just curiosity, or maybe a gut feeling that this moment could change his life. 10 minutes later, Jack found himself in a sleek, black luxury car, something he never imagined he'd be in. As the car glided through the city streets, his thoughts were jumbled. Who was this man he had helped, and why would someone like him, who Jack now assumed was of high status, be so eager to offer a simple thank you? When they arrived at an elegant building downtown, Jack was led to the elevator. As they ascended to the penthouse, his anxiety grew. Every detail screamed wealth: the polished marble floors, the impeccable flower arrangements, and the air of elegance that filled the space. Once they reached the penthouse, large wooden double doors opened to reveal a spacious, sophisticated living room. A middle-aged man with graying hair sat in an armchair near the window, where the soft light of late afternoon illuminated his face. He stood as soon as he saw Jack enter. "Jack, I'm so glad you agreed to come," the man said warmly, extending his hand. "I'm George Adams, and I owe you my life." George's words hit Jack hard. He knew he had helped a stranger, but hearing those words of sincere gratitude stirred a whirlwind of emotions. The man before him wasn't just grateful, he seemed deeply moved by Jack's gesture. A simple exchange, yet filled with meaning, had changed the course of both their lives. "I didn't do much, just acted on instinct," Jack replied, still surprised by the situation. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay." Sometimes it's in those instinctual acts that we find true nobility, Jack. I might not have woken up that day, but thanks to you, I'm here, and I want to repay your kindness. Their conversation was briefly interrupted when the assistant entered the room with a tray of drinks. As they sipped, George began to open up about his life. He was a successful businessman, the owner of a chain of high-end furniture stores. However, the intense pace of his work had led him to neglect his health. The episode on the street wasn't just an accident, it had been a serious cardiac emergency, brought on by accumulated stress. "The truth, Jack, is that you didn't just save my body. You opened my eyes to a necessary change. I had been living trapped by the invisible chains of my own life. Now I want to help someone who helped me without even knowing me," George said, his eyes locking onto Jack's. Jack didn't know what to say. What could he offer in return for such gratitude? He was unemployed, lost, without direction. But perhaps, just maybe, this moment was the beginning of something new. The days after meeting George were marked by an unease Jack couldn't quite explain. He had saved a man's life, and as a result, found himself at the doorstep of an opportunity he never could have imagined. George, with his generous and calm demeanor, had made it clear that he didn't just want to say thank you. He wanted to help, but that help didn't come without a dilemma for Jack. What did he really want from life? That same afternoon, George had made an offer. "Jack, I have a position open at my company. It's not just any job, it's a chance for you to reinvent yourself. I see something in you, a capacity to do more than just survive." George's words echoed in Jack's head, night after night. He told Sarah about the offer, but something still held him back. It wasn't the fear of working or facing new challenges. What scared him was the feeling that he might be grabbing onto an easy solution, something he didn't deserve, that had come to him by pure luck. Sarah, always firm and rational, encouraged him to accept. "Jack, this isn't luck, it's the result of your kindness. Maybe God put this man in your path for a bigger reason," she said softly. But the doubt lingered. While walking through the city a few days later, reflecting on his wife's words and his sleepless nights, Jack realized something. He was afraid of change. He had always wanted to be the provider for his family, but recent failures had stained his confidence. And now, an unexpected offer was placing him at the threshold of an uncertain but promising future. Should he accept? The next afternoon, Jack returned to George's office to give his answer. The imposing glass facade of the building, the walls reflecting the blue sky, everything seemed distant from the reality Jack knew. As he ascended to the penthouse, He felt as if he were carrying an invisible weight. The decision he was about to make could change his life entirely. When he entered the office, George greeted him with a warm smile. "Jack, I'm glad you came. I hope you've had time to think about my proposal," he said, gesturing for Jack to sit down. The atmosphere was calm, but Jack's mind was racing. He knew he was standing at a crossroads. "Yes, George, I've thought about it a lot. I truly appreciate the opportunity, really. But something inside me still questions whether I'm ready for this. What can I bring to your company? I've been out of work for months. I feel disconnected from my old abilities." Jack's words came out heavy, as if the fear and insecurity of all those months were finally being expressed. George listened attentively, his face serene. When Jack finished, George leaned forward slightly. "I understand, Jack. I know that change can be frightening. But listen to me. What I'm offering you isn't just a job. It's a chance to start over. You saved my life when no one else cared. Now, I want to give you the opportunity to save your own. Don't think of this as a favor, but as a fair exchange." George's words touched Jack deeply. He remembered the moment when he saw the man lying on the ground, alone, and how he had acted without thinking of himself. Perhaps that was, in fact, the key to understanding his new reality. It was time to believe that he also deserved a new chance. "I accept," Jack said, finally feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. George smiled, stood up, and shook his hand firmly. "Excellent. We'll start your training tomorrow. I'm sure this will be a new chapter in your life." Jack left the building with a sense of hope he hadn't felt in a long time. The decision had been made, and with it came new responsibilities. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but something was different this time. It was as if, for the first time in a long time, he was in control of his own destiny. When he got home, Sarah was waiting for him, eager for news. "So what did you decide?" she asked, as Emily played on the floor, unaware of the tension between her parents. Jack smiled, sat beside Sarah, and took her hand. "I accepted. Let's see what the future holds." She smiled back, her eyes shining with the same hope he now carried. "I'm so proud of you, Jack. I know this is the start of something great for us." And that night, for the first time in months, Jack slept peacefully, feeling that he had found his purpose again. The road ahead was uncertain, but he was ready to face any obstacle that came his way. The next day, Jack woke up early. For the first time in months, he felt the excitement of starting something new, but also the nervousness that comes with a fresh beginning. He dressed carefully, chose his best shirt, and left the house after a long, tight hug from Sarah and Emily. His daughter's smile was the fuel he needed to face the day. When Jack arrived at George's company, he was greeted by Helen, an efficient assistant who led him to the department where he would begin his training. The environment was unlike anywhere he had ever worked before. The walls were decorated with modern art, and the soft sound of keyboards and ringing phones in the background signaled the pace of a prosperous and constantly moving company. Helen calmly explained what would be expected of Jack. George's company was one of the largest suppliers of luxury furniture in the country, and Jack's role would be to assist the design and engineering teams with the logistics of new products. It wasn't a simple task, but it also wasn't beyond his reach. "We value ideas here. Never feel intimidated to contribute," Helen said with a smile. That eased Jack's nerves a little, though he still carried the insecurity of being the new guy. The first few hours of his day were spent learning about the company's internal processes. He was introduced to various team members, all of whom treated him with respect, which helped to ease some of the tension he felt. But at the same time, Jack realized how much he needed to push himself to keep up. The technology, the detailed processes, and the intense flow of ideas left him feeling a bit lost. But he knew he couldn't let his insecurity show. During the lunch break, Jack stepped out to walk around and clear his mind. The weight of responsibility was beginning to set in again. He knew he needed to prove himself. Despite George's kindness, Jack wanted his presence there to be justified by merit, not gratitude. As he walked through the busy streets downtown, these thoughts consumed him. When Jack returned to the office, he was surprised by an unexpected invitation. George had called him into a meeting with some of the company's top executives. Jack's heart raced. He hadn't expected to have direct contact with the higher-ups so soon, But he knew this could be a valuable opportunity. In the meeting room, the atmosphere was formal, but not intimidating. George made sure to introduce Jack to the team naturally. "This is Jack, our new team member. He's starting today, but I'm confident his contributions will be significant to what we're about to discuss," George said, with a confidence that Jack himself didn't yet feel. The meeting focused on a new project to expand the brand into international markets. The idea was to create a line of exclusive furniture for a highly demanding clientele, something that could merge the company's tradition with modern trends. The executives discussed technical details, market figures, and the logistical implications of the expansion. Jack, for his part, listened carefully, trying to absorb every piece of information. At one point, George turned directly to Jack and asked, "Jack, do you have any thoughts on this? I know you're just starting, but sometimes a fresh perspective can bring insights we don't see." Time seemed to stop for a moment. Everyone in the room turned their eyes to him. Jack's blood rushed and his anxiety spiked. He felt the weight of being the newcomer, but at the same time, something inside him pushed him to speak. He knew he couldn't waste this chance. "Well," he began hesitantly, "I think that when entering new markets, it's important to consider the brand's identity. Our tradition is a strong differentiator, and that could attract many clients. But at the same time, it might be worth incorporating some more contemporary elements, something that shows the brand is also keeping up with global design innovations." The silence that followed his words seemed to last forever. Then, George smiled, approving the comment. "That's exactly the kind of thinking we need, Jack. Tradition is our foundation, but we need to innovate. The combination of both will be our advantage." Relief washed over Jack. He had contributed. Even though his idea was simple, the fact that he had participated and received George's support was a huge step. He left the meeting with a sense of accomplishment, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Perhaps, for the first time, he was starting to believe in himself again. When the day ended, Jack returned home exhausted but happy. Sarah was waiting eagerly to hear how the first day had gone. "So, how was it?" she asked, her eyes curious. Jack smiled, sat down on the couch beside her, and told her everything. He didn't hide his insecurities, but he also shared the satisfaction of having overcome his fears and contributed to something important. "It was tough, but I think I'll do well there," he said, more confident than before. As the weeks passed, Jack adjusted to the company's rhythm. Gradually, his initial fears gave way to confidence. Each new challenge that arose was an opportunity to prove to himself that he was capable. George's company ran like a living organism, where every gear had to work in harmony, and Jack was beginning to feel like part of that machine. He had moved past the initial training phase and was now more involved in product development projects. Meetings with designers and engineers became frequent, and Jack felt more comfortable contributing ideas. The atmosphere of innovation inspired him, and he began to see that, despite everything, he had found a place where he could grow. One afternoon, while organizing reports at his desk, George unexpectedly appeared in the office. He was usually accessible, but rarely involved directly in day-to-day activities. "Jack, do you have a minute?" George asked, with that familiar cordial smile. "Of course, sir. How can I help?" Jack replied, standing up immediately. He still wasn't entirely comfortable with how close he was to someone like George, but he was handling it better. "Actually, I need your help with something a little different today," George said, gesturing for Jack to follow him. Curious, Jack followed him to the meeting room, where Helen and other board members were already gathered. George's expression was serious, and Jack could feel that the atmosphere in the room was different from other times. George began to speak. "We're at a delicate moment. The international market is responding well to our products, but here in the US, we're facing unexpected challenges. This includes an internal crisis at our main factory. We need to make quick decisions to ensure our production isn't affected." Jack listened attentively, trying to grasp the impact of what was being discussed. The factory mentioned was the heart of the company, where most of the luxury furniture was produced. Any problems there could cause a ripple effect throughout the entire distribution chain. Helen continued the explanation. We're experiencing delays in deliveries, and there's growing dissatisfaction among the workers. This has directly impacted our ability to meet deadlines, and if we don't act quickly, we could lose important clients. Jack had never dealt with something so serious. He felt the weight of responsibility grow with every minute as the details of the problem were laid out. But what surprised him most was George's next statement. "Jack, you have a profile I admire. You're resilient, detail-oriented, and you've already proven you can handle unexpected situations. I want you to go to the factory tomorrow and see for yourself what's happening. Talk to the supervisors, understand the challenges, and if possible, bring me suggestions on how we can solve this situation." The request caught Jack by surprise. He knew he had grown a lot in the company, but he never imagined George would place him in such a position of trust so soon. "Sir, He hesitated, but before he could refuse or express his insecurity, George smiled and placed a hand on his shoulder. "I trust you, Jack, and I know you'll do a great job. Don't worry, you'll have the support of the whole team. But I need someone who can look at this with fresh eyes, and you're the right person for that." Jack nodded, still processing the weight of the responsibility. Accepting meant stepping even further out of his comfort zone, facing a complex situation that required much more than he was used to. But at the same time, refusing would mean closing the door on a unique opportunity. That night, when Jack told Sarah about the task, she encouraged him as always. "Jack, this just shows how much you've grown. If George trusts you, it's because he sees something special. And I see it too. It's going to work out, I'm sure." Even with Sarah's reassuring words, Jack spent the night awake, worried about what he would find at the factory. It wasn't just the fear of the unknown, but the fear of disappointing George and the company that had given him a second chance. The next morning, Jack took a flight to the city where the factory was located. Upon arrival, he was greeted by the operations manager, who seemed a bit worn out from the pressure of recent weeks. Despite its grandeur, the factory seemed less efficient than Jack had imagined. There was something in the air, a sense of discomfort among the workers, as if morale was low. Jack spent the day talking to supervisors, listening to workers' concerns, and observing the production line. The problem seemed deeper than just delays in deliveries. There was a disconnect between management and the workers, something that went beyond logistics. By the end of the day, as Jack returned to the hotel, he found himself reflecting on everything he had witnessed. He knew he needed to find a solution, but this task would require more than just management techniques. It would require empathy, something Jack had in abundance, and the ability to understand what motivated those people. The flight back home was quiet. Jack, absorbed in his thoughts, gazed out the airplane window, trying to organize the information he had gathered during his visit to the factory. The problem was much deeper than he had anticipated. It wasn't just about technical failures or delivery delays, it was about a human disconnect. The workers were demoralized, the leaders were distant, and communication within the factory seemed broken. Jack knew he needed a plan that went beyond numbers and charts. The next day, when Jack arrived back at the company, George was waiting for him. Jack was anxious but prepared to share what he had discovered. After a few minutes of conversation, Jack began to relay his experience. "George, the issue isn't just with production. There's a lack of trust between the workers and the managers. They feel ignored, like they're just cogs in a machine, and it's directly affecting the factory's performance." George listened carefully, his expression growing more serious with each passing minute. Jack continued, "The supervisors are overwhelmed, the workers feel insecure, and there's enormous pressure to meet goals that, in the current conditions, are almost impossible." When Jack finished laying out his analysis, George was silent for a few moments, thinking. Finally, he spoke. "This confirms part of what I suspected, but you've managed to see things that many of us here didn't. We need to act fast, and I want you, Jack, to help us fix this." Once again, Jack found himself facing a responsibility he hadn't expected. George trusted him in a way that, a few months ago, Jack could never have imagined. "I want you to work directly with the factory managers to implement changes. We're going to strengthen communication, create an environment of trust, and motivate the workers to believe in what they're doing again," George said, with conviction. The weight returned to Jack's chest. He wasn't an expert in people management. He had never led such a large team before, and now he had the task of helping resolve one of the company's biggest challenges. However, he knew he couldn't let George down. And more importantly, he couldn't let himself down. That night, at home, Sarah found him deep in thought, sitting at the kitchen table. "What's going on? You look worried," she asked, handing him a cup of coffee. Jack sighed, running his hands over his face. "George gave me another responsibility. He wants me to help reorganize the factory, fix the problems I found. I don't know if I'm ready for this, Sarah." She smiled, as she always did when she saw her husband doubting himself. "Jack, you've faced bigger challenges. Remember when you lost your job and thought there was no hope? Now you're in a position where they trust you to make a difference. You can do it. And you're not alone." Sarah's words always had the power to calm him. Jack knew she was right. He had overcome many difficulties before, and this would just be another one. With renewed confidence, he began to plan his next steps. He knew that to motivate the workers, he would need to involve them in decisions, show them that their voices were heard. He would also need to improve communication between the leaders and the team, creating an environment where everyone felt valued. In the following days, Jack returned to the factory. This time, with a clearer purpose and a plan in mind. He gathered the supervisors and production line leaders in an impromptu meeting room, and instead of giving orders or imposing changes, he began asking questions. "How do you think we can improve the situation here? What do you feel is missing?" He listened carefully to their responses, noting down every suggestion. The leaders, surprised by Jack's approach, began to open up more. They talked about the pressure they felt, the lack of resources, and how, many times, they felt powerless in the face of problems. Next, Jack gathered groups of workers. He spoke to them individually, visited their work areas, and made sure to be present at every stage of production. At first, the workers eyed him with suspicion, accustomed to the distance of their superiors. But gradually, they began to trust him, seeing that he wasn't there to supervise or criticize, but to understand their struggles. An older worker named Gerald, who had been on the assembly line for over 20 years, was the first to open up. "No one ever asked us what we thought, you know? We've been here for so long, but it feels like we're invisible," Gerald said, while showing Jack the assembly line. "I know, Gerald, but I want that to change. We need you as much as you need the company. If something isn't right, we need to work together to fix it," Jack responded sincerely. Slowly, the atmosphere in the factory began to shift. People started to feel like they were part of something bigger. Jack, with his human and empathetic approach, was achieving what many managers had failed to: a sense of belonging among the workers. By the end of that week, when Jack returned to the company headquarters to meet with George, he felt different. He hadn't just completed the task, but he had learned something about himself in the process. George welcomed him with a satisfied smile. "It seems like things are starting to turn around at the factory, Jack. I knew you'd do a great job." Jack smiled back, feeling a pride he hadn't felt in a long time. "There's still a lot to be done, but I think we're on the right track." The following months brought a significant transformation to the factory. The changes Jack had implemented began to show results. The workers were more motivated, communication flowed better, and production, which had previously faced delays, was now back on schedule. The sense of belonging that Jack had worked so hard to instill was finally taking root. George, always observant, kept a close eye on the reports and progress. He made sure to congratulate Jack with each small victory, which only reinforced Jack's confidence in his own abilities. However, with the company's growth and the success of the new initiatives, new responsibilities also emerged, and Jack soon realized that the weight of success wasn't as light as he had imagined. The workdays grew longer. The time Jack used to spend at home with Sarah and Emily gradually diminished. His visits to the factory became frequent, and he became increasingly involved in the company's strategic decisions alongside George. The satisfaction of being recognized and the pride in seeing his work thrive pushed him forward, but his personal life began to suffer in silence. One evening, when Jack came home late, he found Emily asleep on the living room couch. Sarah was sitting next to her, looking tired. When Jack entered, she stood up and looked at him with an expression he couldn't immediately interpret. "She waited up for you all night. She wanted to show you the drawing she made at school," Sarah said, her voice heavy with a quiet concern. Jack felt a tightness in his chest. He had spent days immersed in work, barely noticing the time passing. "I'm sorry, Sarah. He tried to explain, but the words didn't seem enough. "I understand that you're busy, Jack. I know the job demands a lot from you right now, but Emily misses you." "And I do too," Sarah said, not accusingly, but with sadness. "We're still here. I just don't want you to lose sight of what really matters." The silence between them was thick. Jack knew she was right, but the feeling that he had to prove himself, that he couldn't fail now that he had achieved so much, consumed him. He approached, kissed Emily gently on the forehead, and then hugged Sarah. "I'll try to do better," he said, though he knew it wouldn't be easy. In the following days, Jack began to reflect on the balance between his professional and personal life. The success he had longed for came with a high price, and he began to wonder if he was willing to pay it. More and more, his mind oscillated between the pride he felt for what he was building and the fear of losing the people he loved. During one of his visits to the factory, Jack met with Gerald, the oldest worker, during lunchtime. Gerald always made a point to stop and chat with Jack, sharing stories from decades of working there. But that day, Gerald noticed something different about Jack. "You look tired, son. What's bothering you?" Gerald asked, with the wisdom of someone who had seen many cycles of highs and lows in life. Jack sighed and allowed himself to be honest. "I'm trying to keep everything balanced, Gerald. The factory is doing well. The work is intense, but I feel like I'm losing time with my family. It's not easy." Gerald smiled, a smile that carried the weight of years of experience. "You know, I went through something similar. When my kids were little, I worked so much that I hardly saw them. I wanted to give them the best, but in the end, I realized that what they wanted most was my presence. I learned the hard way that success means nothing if you lose the people you love along the way." Gerald's words echoed in Jack's mind for the rest of the day. He knew there was truth in what the man had said. George trusted him. The work was going well, but what about his family? How could he balance the two sides of his life without sacrificing one? The following week, George called Jack in for a meeting. They needed to discuss the company's next big project, an ambitious expansion into the European market. The project, if successful, would place the company in an international spotlight. "Jack, I want you to lead this initiative. I know you're ready for it. We need someone with your vision and dedication to ensure the success of this venture," George said, with a tone that mixed expectation and confidence. The offer was irresistible. It was the crowning achievement of everything Jack had worked for since the day he saved George's life. He should have been thrilled, but instead, he felt an even heavier burden on his shoulders. What would leading this project mean? More hours away from home? More sleepless nights? When Jack returned home that night, Sarah could tell something was wrong. "What happened?" she asked, already knowing her husband well. Jack took a deep breath, thinking about how to explain the new responsibility. "George wants me to lead an expansion project. It's a huge opportunity, but it's going to require even more time from me, Sarah," he said, his voice filled with doubt. She looked at him in silence for a few seconds, processing the news. "I know how important this is to you, Jack. I know how hard you've worked to get here. But please, don't forget about us in the process." Sarah's words weighed on him like a truth he had been trying to ignore. The success he had once thought was everything now seemed like a double-edged sword. The days following George's offer were filled with intense reflection for Jack. The expansion project was, without a doubt, the biggest opportunity of his life. It was the pinnacle of everything he had worked for, the culmination of years of effort and dedication. But at the same time, he couldn't ignore the signs around him. Sarah and Emily needed him. His family was the reason he got up every day. And now he saw clearly that professional success couldn't be the only measure of his fulfillment. One Saturday morning, instead of going to the office as he had done in recent months, Jack decided to spend the day at home with his family. Emily was playing in the living room and Sarah was preparing breakfast. The smell of fresh bread filled the kitchen, and for a moment, Jack felt a peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. He realized how much he had missed these simple moments. As they enjoyed breakfast together, Sarah looked at him and smiled. "It's good to have you here, Jack. It feels like it's been a long time since we had a moment like this." Her voice was soft, but it carried a clear message. She wasn't asking for more gifts, more comfort, or more money. She wanted Jack's presence. And that was something he wanted too. On Monday, Jack returned to the company's headquarters. Determined, he knew he needed to give George an answer about leading the new project, but he also knew that his decision had to balance both sides of his life. When he walked into George's office, the businessman greeted him with the same cordiality as always. But Jack could feel the anticipation in the air. "Jack, I hope you've had time to think about what we discussed. You're the key to the success of this expansion. What do you say?" George asked, his gaze firm but filled with confidence. Jack took a deep breath before answering. "George, I'm very grateful for the trust you've placed in me. When I started here, I never imagined I'd have the chance to be part of something so big. But the truth is, while all of this has been incredible, I've realized that I need to find a balance between work and my family." George's expression shifted slightly. He looked at Jack for a few seconds, weighing his words. "I understand what you're saying, and I respect your perspective. But I want you to know that, no matter what choice you make, we're still in this journey together." Jack smiled, relieved. "I'll accept the project, George. But I need you to understand that I'm going to organize myself in a way that won't sacrifice my time with my family. I can help lead this growth, but not at the expense of my personal life." George smiled back, as if he had expected this answer all along. "I knew you'd find a way." The truth, Jack, is that a man's success isn't measured only by financial results, but by how he balances everything around him. I'm proud of you. That conversation marked the beginning of a new chapter for Jack. He had decided to pursue success, but with the awareness that his true worth lay in the people who surrounded him. In the months that followed, he fulfilled his role in the expansion project, keeping the promise he made to himself and his family. Weekends became sacred again. Jack spent more time with Sarah and Emily, and the small moments of leisure he had once neglected began to have meaning again. He continued to grow professionally, but with a new perspective. That success was complete only when shared with those who mattered most. The expansion project was a success. George's company gained international recognition, and Jack became a key player in that growth. But most importantly, he was at peace with his choices. The man who had lost his way was now in control of his destiny, not just at work, but in life. That night, when Jack returned home, Emily ran to him with a radiant smile, showing him a new drawing she had made. Jack knelt down, picked his daughter up in his arms, and looked at the paper. It was a simple drawing of a united family, with a house and a big sun shining in the sky. "Daddy, that's you," Emily said, pointing to the figure of a smiling man in the center of the picture. Jack smiled, feeling the warmth of the scene fill his heart. "Yes, my love, that's me." And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was truly the man he had always wanted to be.